Yo, what's up, everybody? It is so great again to touch base, to catch up, talk about what's been happening. It's recess here in Parliament, so we've really just been working to process the midterm budget policy statement and really meeting with various agencies to ensure that we get the best bang for your buck. It is your money at the end of the day, and when it's said and done, we've got to make sure that money ends up serving you rather than serving the politicians. I do think it's a moment worth noting that the loss to Mamelodi Sundowns is still haunting me. It is still painful indeed. I think we need a commission of inquiry into this because Sundowns are just winning too much. But anyways, I wish them well. As I listened to a great fan say, when Sundowns win, no one hardly blinks. But when Chiefs win, even the rand reacts. I quite like that. That's the Kaiser Chiefs I know. But we will return, everybody. Let's get on to the business of this week. A few big elections. The one was in Botswana. Congratulations to my dear friend Dumaboko, who won that election and won comprehensively, departing away from liberation politics to a new political era, a young leader, a dynamic, a future-focused. I wish him well. I will be at the inauguration, so hopefully we can talk from there, and I will keep you posted about the developments that take place in Botswana as we continue the work that's happening in the SADC region. We saw great elections in Zambia a number of years ago. I was at that inauguration. We saw a great election in Malawi with President Lazarus Chakwera. We fought hard in Zimbabwe to make sure my dear friend Nelson Chamisa wins there. And so we'll keep fighting. The fight for democracy and making sure that we bring about change in SADC continues. And ultimately now Botswana is next. But on to another election. It's the United States of America, probably the biggest election this year. Not only because of the size and nature of the United States, but also because of the influence and the impetus this brings and that has on the world. Let me first of all say it categorically. I want to congratulate President Trump for a comprehensive win. It is important now that in this moment we recognize that he is the president-elect and he will be sworn in January. And what matters is that South Africa continue its bilateral relations with the US, that we ensure that trade agreements such as AGOA continue, and that ultimately we all globally partner together to fight for human rights, to ensure that all citizens, regardless of where they are guaranteed of these human rights, that we have a better conversation about immigration and how people move all over the world, because actually the task that we have is to share skills across the world where people can move from one country to another and be able to share knowledge, that we give legal certainty to immigrants, and ultimately to ensure that as the US continues its path on democracy and a healthy way of seeing both in Botswana and in the US, a healthy switch of power and a departure from the past where elections were not given credence, etc. This is an important mark. But I thought, let me talk a little bit about the US elections and ask the questions, what do we learn from that race? Because I think it will help us. It certainly gave me some pause to think through what does elections mean for me and for us, the people here of South Africa. The first one is, I think it's important to remind yourself always as a candidate that elections are about the future. The message that you put forward, every election is a referendum on tomorrow. Voters in the US were desperate for change, clearly, and they've certainly expressed that. But it didn't necessarily have to be change from Democrats to Republicans. It was a change in some of the economic prospects. I was in the US in January of this year. And I can remember thinking to myself as I went to the shop to buy a sandwich, I thought the sandwich is a lot more expensive than what it usually was. And citizens were feeling the higher cost of goods. And so when it comes to an election, inflation is an issue. It is something that we need to talk about how we can help citizens be able to deal with that? And I can remember quite distinctly listening to a number of interviews where when the question was put, what change could come in the next 4 years, candidates needed to give expression to that. Message, all political leaders they are dispensers of hope. They demonstrate what tomorrow can look like and better for citizens, all citizens, regardless of where they come from. So message is important. It is a vital thing. And if you may not like Make America Great Again, but if I think about some of the campaigns that have won, I think about Barack Obama's Hope and Change. These were about elections of tomorrow. They weren't about what can easily become identity politics. And I think some of what took place in the US elections had a lot steeped in identity, had a lot steeped in othering. Vote for me, I'm not him kind of message. Or, in other words, vote for me because I will kick them out. All of this is an important lesson for us as South Africans to learn that actually, if we are not careful, even for us as a country, we run the absolute risk of going down the path of tribalism, religious intolerance. Eventually, we will start to divide one another. And if we carry on that way, we follow what political scientists talk about demography being destiny, which is that we just pick our identity and go express that. Then in that case, let's forget about voting. Let's rather take the recent census and look at which race is where, which religion is there, and allocate it to the parties or to the races. That is not the way to salvage democracy. It's not going to help. The second lesson I took away from these elections is that candidates matter in an election. You can say all you like about President Trump. Clearly, he resonated with more Americans. But there is always a question you've got to solve for when you're a candidate. Why does it burn within you that you want to be the leader of whatever country, whatever nation you so want to lead? And this is an important thing. No one can answer that question for you. You can have as many endorsements as you like. You can have as many media support as you like. You can have all of that. It has to burn within you that one day when I become president, this is what I will fix. And Tony Blair writes this book, Journey. And in his book, he talks about the fact that I carried around a little notebook that said, one day when I become prime minister, these are the things I want to fix. You have to have it in you. You have to know, I want to fix education. I want to get jobs working. And you can't have a long and exhaustive list. You need a very concise, these are the things I'm going to do to serve the people. And whoever answers the question best, gives it to the people, generally wins. I also think that this is a pause in a big lesson of reflections for all. The third lesson for me is that you can't just go from one election to another as if it's just a treadmill. You've got to reflect on what it means. And I think the Democrats have got a lot to think about. They have to answer the question, what offering they want to make to voters. But I think America in general needs to reflect on this. Because I think you can't keep an America that is divided into red states and blue states. You can't keep an America that just keeps treading down this divisive rhetoric. It is not going to end well. We already had an attempted assassination of a candidate. What additional measures do people take in future to make their point across? You see, one of the more worrying narratives that can come out of this election is that if you voted for him, you must literally be stupid or backward. If voters make a choice, and to Kamala's concession speech in this regard, I thought that it was good to note the fact that it may not be the choice she wanted, but it is a choice Americans made, and it is a choice we have to live with, and we have to make it better for everyone in the next 4 years. But I also think the whole American infrastructure needs to think about this. The media's echo chamber in how it continues to polarize people. And how when you're on Fox, you are from this, and when you're on CNN, you are from that. Long may it never be that when we come to this country, the same exercise is put on the table where media houses are split on that regard. But I also think polling. Yeah, those pollsters, they were all telling us, it's a tight race. Nah, we are all it's going to be close, it's going to be close, it's going to be close. Well, it was a landslide and you were all wrong. And And it is an important issue. Why? Because even here in South Africa, we saw how some of the pollsters were coming out favoring one position, doing this, doing that, talking about what voters would want. You can manipulate citizens in this regard, and no different to what maybe in some ways we saw with Cambridge Analytica. All of those exercises, we need to be careful. If we're going to safeguard democracy, integrity, truth, and making sure that we hold people, particularly those pollsters, need to have a deep reflection, not to advance a view, not to act as thermostats who want to set the temperature of an election, but really act as thermometers who tell us what the temperature of the election is. And that's a different view in this regard. And then I thought maybe the other last point I took away from this election is that we should keep the issues. Let's keep the economy. Let's focus on safety. Let's focus on that. And here in South Africa, it's going to be an important lesson for us. We head into a very, very difficult number of years. And as I've been going through the midterm budget policy statement, so much has struck with me. I've been thinking at length about this ballooning debt that is coming. But I've been thinking at length about water and water problems. You know, as South Africans, we need to create the capacity to learn. It was President Mbeki who pronounced that South Africa will now introduce load shedding. I think it was in the 2008, somewhere there. And all of us thought, oh, well, this is just a passing phase. Well, I can tell you, what happened post that is that load shedding got worse. Direction of state-owned enterprises such as Eskom became unclear. Furthermore, we increased debt, which means that Eskom's debt is one of the single biggest risks to the country's fiscus and the country's entire credit rating. For a cross-defaulting Eskom will be disastrous for this country. But we also now, even though we've kept the lights on, what started to happen is that very wealthy citizens were able to augment for energy, which meant that poor citizens, particularly who live in old apartheid townships, end up in a space where they are now forced today with aging infrastructure and therefore suffering from what is called load reduction. And I just think, to me, what are the lessons here? Today, there's been a declaration in many municipalities that there'd be water restrictions. Almost a bit like President Mbeki announced load shedding. Now it's water restrictions. The next thing that's going to happen is there's a ballooning of debt. All the water boards are starting to make a strong claim to say that no one is able to finance them. Water is going to be a crisis we cannot avert. The next thing that is going to happen is that, like in load shedding, wealthier people are going to sink boreholes and augment their water supply. But what do poor people do? They don't have money for boreholes. So which means water is going to be circulating in communities that is of poor standards, leading to a significant health risk. And more crucially, we will have to take resources that were either meant for education, for healthcare, etc., to try and pump into water and water boards and augment for municipalities that are failing, which means we fail on all areas. Let us learn now and act now. And it's why I think we've got to be intentional on this water issue. I've also been deeply concerned about the state of our education. Before we get into the famous march in the orange that went through at the Voortrekker Monument, my genade. Why in this is not a fight for only the preservation of Afrikaans. It's a fight to make sure our education is democratic for all citizens. I wish they would have chosen Freedom Park or somewhere else that invites all South Africans, regardless of the color of their skin, the language they speak, to come through. Let me tell you something. I'm passionate about education. I want every child in this country to get a good education that prepares them for the future. And it's why when we look at the Bella Bill and its act, there are a number of key issues that we've got to consider, that we as BOSA have been looking at. That the failure of education has been the failure to build quality infrastructure and to provide a quality education for all South Africans. Education in this country is still dependent on the size of your pocket. If you've got money, you'll get a good school. If you don't, you are in deep trouble. And so what it does, thanks to old apartheid spatial networks, etc., you find poor schools in poor neighborhoods, wealthy schools in wealthy neighborhoods. So yes, I'm here to say let's create a quality education for all citizens. It doesn't matter what community you live in. Let's build the best school for you. Let's provide the best infrastructure for you. Let's do that. So that you don't having kids having to queue in long places and traveling for long to try and get to school, realizing that access is still linked to money. So I support the building of infrastructure. I do not support making education only mandatory to a certain age. I think it should be all the way to grade 12 that it should be mandatory. And I think you should give learners options as to what subjects they can take so that you diversify learning. What is universally true, 90% of the people who are unemployed generally don't have a matric or have dropped out at some point. So if you want to fix the employability process, make sure more people are staying in school and getting through school. All our successful people that we celebrate, Bo Sia, Bo Trevor, Bo whoever, name them, you find the fundamental thing that happened in their lives is that they got a good education. They got a good school. They got through school. Now let me talk about language for one subject. Should Afrikaans schools exist? Of course they should. Should Zulu schools exist? Of course they should. What I do want is for governing bodies to be able to have more control over how that policy is developed. I reject the idea of turning public schooling into state schooling. State schooling is when the government has more control over the education. No. We agreed that it must be public education, which means the public must decide. So yes, we must limit the amount of control that we give to the state and allow more citizens to participate. This is an important dynamic because it will matter across multiple fora. So let us make that a realistic prospect for more and more people. And so in the processing of even some of the clauses that have been suspended, I have raised this concern and I will continue to raise it again. If there are problems with the Bella Bill, it must be sent back to Parliament where all the people in this country can make submissions. I reject the idea of anyone being able to privately lobby the president. It is a dangerous practice because on another day, another law will be passed. It will be at the president's desk and another interest group will fight the president individually and manage to get their way. This is not how we make laws in this country. So fellow South Africans, public education is vital. Let's fix it. Let's be ambitious. I want to live in a country where our kids, man, can compete with anyone. I want to live in a country where schooling becomes a place where you can take refuge and say, I now go to this world-class infrastructure. It lets a child dream when they can come to a school, work on a computer. Why can't we make it our ambition that by the end of next year, no school should be without internet? That no child should be educated without learning how to code, without getting through. Why don't we make sure that our dream is to produce more graduates, more students who can qualify for graduates than less? Why are our ambitions so low so as to say that all we're trying to do is fix for access that was limited during apartheid? That perpetuates us living in the past. Rather, if we fight for the future, let's rather say, regardless of where you live, whether it's in Lusikisiki or in Lendadna, the education you get must be world class. Our teachers can do an incredible job. So when we say let us live and strive for freedom, we mean let's continue to fight. And I want to even challenge the Minister of Basic Education. When it comes to this issue of children dying of food poisoning, please let us put a public education program in every school right now that a child knows when they buy something at a spaza shop, it must be clearly marked. We must know where it comes from, and they must be able to know that the owner of that place can be held accountable if something goes wrong. Let's educate. Because yes, we can go audit what gets sold in spaza shops. We can do all of those things. I get that. Let's do that. And send police agencies and forces to go collect and confiscate goods. That's fine. and regularize what happens in the township economy, that is natural. We're going to do that. But let's be at the forefront of using our schooling infrastructure to educate our kids more so they are, at the end of the day, custodians of their decision-making ability and they can make the best choices possible. We are fighting for this country, and I want to build one South Africa that works for everybody. And I hope that we can continue a dialogue that we say this country belongs to all of us who live in it. Much love. I will see you soon.